Welcome to the fourth installment of the Students as Stakeholders podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Brogan. Before we get right into the thick of it, you may have noticed that we took a long hiatus since June, and there's been quite a few developments since our last episode. Firstly, the biggest news is that I have with me a new co-host that will be joining us from now on. His name is Patrick Morsi, and he is a fellow colleague and friend who attends St. Michael's College. I've always admired his work and dedication to students, both within and outside of our community, and I am incredibly grateful to have him with us for our future episodes. Patrick, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you'd like?
Thank you for the kind introduction, Dan. It is a pleasure to once again be working with you. As aforementioned, my name is Patrick Morsi, and I am a colleague of Dan's at St. Michael's College. I decided to pursue a pathway of education because prior to my college studies, I had found it deeply rewarding to help people learn and grow. During summers in high school, I had opportunities to volunteer through my church working with youth on service trips. During the winters, I taught snowboarding at a local ski mountain. Through these experiences, it became clear to me that I had a passion for education and doing what I could do to better the experiences of others. At St. Michael's College, I am currently pursuing a major in history with minors in education and philosophy. My focus in education is centered around experiential education and providing unique and creative approaches to teaching. With regards to the current educational landscape, I align with my colleague Dan here on many issues. I too believe there is much value to be found in emphasizing student vocality in our educational institutions. Students deserve representation with regards to decisions around educational policies and practices in our institutions. In addition, I believe our educational practices in this country could do more for our students to aptly prepare them for adulthood. I believe our educational practices are lacking in two dimensions. The first being an absence of educational opportunities for students to acquire tangible life skills, and the second being the absence of opportunities for students to practice their critical thinking skills in real-life applications and settings. In this country, I feel as though our perspective of a quality education has its roots in providing foundational knowledge and skills in academic settings. This is seen in the practice through the rigorous standards we have our students aim to achieve. I believe that there are many ways we as educators can extend beyond this narrow lens to enrich future generations. I think that often educators and institutions stay within the confines of standard-based teaching because it is often conceptualized as tried and true. Though it is evident that this is not the case. With a widening achievement gap between American students and students in foreign countries, it is time for new approaches to education. I personally do not think there has been a better time to rethink how we should approach education in our institutions.
Thank you very much, Pat. Now, another development for this podcast is that we wanted to be more diverse in our coverage of educational topics. Though the primary focus will still be around student representation, we wanted to expand our lens of how we interpret educational issues and how these issues permeate throughout our society. Both Pat and I are incredibly fascinated with educational policy, and we hope to tackle educational issues with a comprehensive analysis and also critically think about solutions that we can propose to mediate these educational concerns. There is one issue in particular that we both feel is often greatly overlooked, and that is the concern of special education within America. There are so many ways in which we can examine this subject, but to avoid brevity and ground ourselves in clarity, I think it would be best that we investigate how voices from students with disabilities are incorporated in education and what opportunities these students have within our current school framework, and what opportunities they deserve to have. And now that we have gone over some general housekeeping, we will now examine how to empower special needs students and incorporate their voices within education in today's podcast.
I'd like to start by speaking about the origins of special education in the American educational landscape. The first policy that actually had an impact with regards to creating special education was the Brown versus Board of Ed Supreme Court decision during the Civil Rights era. The most important clause in this case regarding special education was the Supreme Court determining that separate cannot mean equal. In this particular case, the statement was originally in response to racial segregation in American schools, but the language in this case provided all students the right to desegregated education. This language was used to overturn an earlier case in 1919, Betty v. Board of Education. This case was brought to the Supreme Court after a school board determined a child had to attend a school for the deaf because the student had speech and motor difficulties. The Supreme Court at this time determined that the right of the child to attend school could not be insisted, that its presence therein is harmful to the interests of the school. Essentially, Brown v. Board of Ed created the foundation for inclusionary policy for students with disabilities. Moving into today, students with disabilities are legally guaranteed protections and accommodations within the United States. By law, students with disabilities are guaranteed a free and appropriate education. What this means is that students with disabilities are required by institutions to receive an education that aptly provides learning standards and goals tailored to the student's individual needs. Students with disabilities are also required by law to have an individual education plan. This is a plan that is supposed to detail the disabilities and needs of the student, as well as individualizing learning objectives for the student according to their needs. Even though students with disabilities are afforded far more rights and protections today than they were in prior generations, the accommodations provided for them have not by any means reached a form of perfection. Today, students with disabilities attend the same institutions as their peers, but that does not mean they always receive the same experience. Oftentimes, students with disabilities are taught separately from their peers in schools. If they remain in the same classroom as their peers, they are often paired with a paraprofessional. While there is definite merit in the practice of having a faculty member assist our students with special needs, oftentimes these paraprofessionals are some of the least qualified education faculty working at schools. By allowing the position of paraprofessional to be an entry-level job, we are effectively saying to our students who need this accommodation that they are less valued than their peers. As a whole, our nation has no doubt made progress in recent generations, but there's still much work to be done to effectively accommodate to the needs of our students with disabilities.
There are multiple research cases which have proven the enhanced benefit of having students participate in after-school clubs and extracurricular activities. The results from these studies demonstrate that students who do participate in extracurricular activities demonstrate better performances in standardized testing, overall academic achievement, higher school attendance rates, and improved behavior, to name a few positive effects. What's more is that by providing students with disabilities the opportunity to participate in inclusive extracurricular programs, they are able to gain a sense of belonging and community that isn't always guaranteed within the classroom. Consider this vignette. Students in an inclusive classroom may meet every day, but that doesn't always provide the opportunity for fellow students to interact socially. Imagine, however, that a student with Asperger's, in this vignette, we'll call this person Susan, has a passion for music and was made aware of their school's marching band program that meets 3 days a week after school. Susan has already been learning how to play the trumpet on her own with private lessons, but has never been able to demonstrate her talent to an audience. Now that she is a part of the marching band program, Susan gets to play the trumpet at the halftime show whenever her school has a football game. Even more importantly, while rehearsing, Susan gets to build close relationships with the brass section where they rehearse together through sectionals. During this time, students get to learn about each other and their hobbies, which brings them closer together, realizing what they have in common with each other. Additionally, when someone in the brass section makes a mistake, whether it is being flat or not being in step while marching, there is support that stems from other brass players to help each other to improve and grow. Susan, who has been rehearsing for years, is even able to help one of the other students get a certain phrase correct, which they had been struggling on performing. Susan now has an environment where she can thrive and belong, whereas prior to this experience, Susan was only playing by herself. Imagine the excitement and happiness Susan would have seeing an audience during the halftime show applauding, while her newfound friends in the brass section celebrate their show's success. Now consider if Susan wasn't made aware of this opportunity, or if her parents didn't push for her to join marching band. She would still be going home after school with limited social interactions, where she would be playing the trumpet by herself. There would be no cheering, no camaraderie, and little opportunity for Susan to thrive in a subject she is passionate about, because that channel wasn't provided for her. This might be a fictional example, but it is evident that far too many students with disabilities aren't properly made aware of extracurricular opportunities at school. What kind of protections do students with disabilities have? Is there anything in place to ensure that students are being informed of programs they can join after school? In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was promulgated, wherein students with disabilities were guaranteed certain rights to public education. In fact, any program that receives federal funding, whether an educational program or a place of employment, was under purview of the law. Most notably, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act has been reaffirmed to include that students with disabilities must be provided the equal opportunity of being able to participate in extracurricular activities, field trips, late bus programs, and summer camps. It is explicitly stated that students are provided with these opportunities. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, also known as the ADA, guarantees that students with disabilities are provided with the necessary and appropriate accommodations while in school and in the community setting. This would mean that students would be provided with accommodations if they wish to join an organization at school without being excluded due to a disability. To the contrary, they would be supported and would be provided with the tools necessary to be included. The Individuals with Disabilities Act of 2004, otherwise known as the IDEA, also ensures that students are provided with access to a quality public educational experience, as well as ensuring that both the students and parents of the students are made aware of their rights within the public education system. This would pertain to the notion of extracurricular activities as well, since there is a clear precedence in the Rehabilitation Act describing access to after-school clubs as a right for students with disabilities. At this juncture, we see that there are at least 3 laws that guarantee that students with disabilities must be allowed to join after-school clubs, that they are also guaranteed accommodations to be included within after-school organizations, and that they have a right to know when they are able to join. The question I pose, however, is the following. Are students with disabilities being made aware of these opportunities for them? Considering that there's little to no data pertaining to the percentage of special needs students being a part of inclusive after-school clubs and organizations, it is then likely that this is an issue that is under the radar for both administrators and researchers in the field of education. We know that students have the legal right to join after-school clubs, and we also know that there is extensive research demonstrating the inherent benefits of being in a club for academic and social experiences. Yet, there are many schools where I can guarantee special needs students are not a part of extracurricular activities that are inclusive. How do we mediate this issue that has been undetected by schools and researchers? I think the first step is to know the rights in which students have to pursue these after-school clubs. Whether you are listening in as a student, an educator, or a lifelong learner, it is imperative to check in with your local school to inquire about special needs students being a part of extracurricular activities. Additionally, it is crucial to ensure that these clubs and organizations are being advertised in all parts of the school, including where students with disabilities receive additional support. Enforcement of the legal rights to students with disabilities cannot necessarily be maintained and observed by government officials. So it is important to be able to monitor, as stakeholders, what is being done to ensure that students are being provided with the opportunities guaranteed to them. Before we end our podcast here today, let us first take a look at our exit card.
While progress has been made with regards to advancing the practice of special education, there's still much work to be done. In our institutions, the first priority should be to ensure that all students feel welcomed and accepted within the community. For educators, that means doing our best to include students from all walks of life in our schools. By providing accessibility and choice in our classrooms, educators can more effectively engage and educate students to help improve the quality of education for everyone in the classroom.
There is extensive research that demonstrates the academic and social benefits of participating in extracurricular activities. There are several federal laws that guarantee students with disabilities the right to join after-school organizations, as well as having accommodations to participate within the club. And students must be made aware of their rights to join such organizations at their schools. As stakeholders, we have a responsibility to maintain these rights and work together with students who have disabilities to ensure that inclusion and participation is not simply an ideology on paper, but a course of action that is being taken deliberately every day within our school systems. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion here today. Please tune in next time for more thoughtful conversations regarding education and students' rights. I'm your host, Dan Brogan.
And I'm Patrick Morsi,
Wishing you the best.